Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Concrete Institute of Australia. I'm John Nichols, Technical Manager for the Institute. It's my pleasure to be your host for this afternoon's webinar, Women in Concrete Network, the Importance of Gender Diversity in the Workplace. This webinar invites two members of the Women in Concrete to share their experiences in developing gender diversity. The speakers are Elizabeth Taylor and Chris Kouris. I'd now like to introduce Estelle Clapham, who will introduce our two speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in extending a very warm welcome to Estelle.
Thank you, John. And even though that was tech generated, that was the best round of applause I've ever received. So I'm going to take that. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CIA's Women in Concrete webinar, The Importance of Gender Diversity in the Workforce. As John said, I am Estelle Clapham, and I am currently the Education Manager with SmartCrete CRC. However, I am also deeply passionate about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and in particular, gender diversity. So I'm really looking forward to today's session. For those that aren't familiar, Women in Concrete is a community and technical forum. The focus is to promote greater female involvement, participation, knowledge sharing, and membership with the Concrete Institute of Australia, by making events, activities, and committees more inclusive, accessible, and inviting. This aligns with the Concrete Institute of Australia's mission of achieving their vision of excellence in concrete. So I'm now going to move on to the presentations, and I would like to introduce our first presenter, Emeritus Professor Elizabeth Taylor AO, who is currently the chair at SmartCrete CRC. Elizabeth specialises in governance effectiveness and analysis of complex projects and ecosystems. Her career has spanned industry, design and construction, and academia. Her engineering underpins her consultancy, and she has built excellent board-level leadership in professional organisations, innovative technology entities, and humanitarian organisations. Her presentation is titled Embedding Diversity Within the Workplace, and will discuss how acknowledging the importance of diversity is only the first step. So over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Estelle. Now, I'm just trying to make sure I do remember the training that was given to me regarding being, there we are, start the technology so that I can run the PowerPoint. So it is not a mistake that I have diversity within the workplace, because as someone who was doing women in engineering activities at the University of Technology in the 80s, I became very interested in how complex the whole area is, and many of the very simplistic models of increasing women's recognition of the value of being in the engineering profession was really having to be reconfigured and thought about further when you actually think about what the diversity there is within how we are structured and how we operate and how we are being in the workplace as women. So I'm just thought I had control, but now I don't. John, can you just make sure?
Just bear with it, Elizabeth. Just see if you can move your keyboard or your pad. And okay. There we go. You've got it now. That's it.
I've got it now. Right.
Yep.
So I would just like to also acknowledge the traditional owners and just note that I am on the lands of the Camaragal people. And I certainly draw enormous amount of inspiration from the journey that they have been taking and the journey that we take as women within lands and areas of activity within our community where we have had a very problematic history. As noted by Estelle, I'm looking not just at acknowledging the important first step of diversity, but also how we can think realistically about what we mean by real authority, accountability, and decision-making within the workplace, and a recognition that it does require transformation. And I'm really looking forward to Chris's presentation, where she will take what actual steps are happening in the workplace at the moment to continue this journey that we have been on for so many years. I would like to really point out how difficult and complex a journey it is. And I do that not so much for us to become disenchanted, but more for us to take heart from the fact that, yes, there will be times when we feel we're not getting anywhere. Yes, there will be times when we feel like it's all too much. But change does happen, and our capacity to stick with it is going to be a very important part of that. So what do we mean by diversity? I looked it up in the dictionary, and it means the action of being diverse, which I thought was not very helpful at all. Who is diverse? What's the datum point for making that? Why are we so concerned about the value of diversity in the workplace? What impact does it have, and what approaches can we use individually and organisationally to support it in the workplace? I have been an academic for a number of years, so of course I do develop for myself an intellectual framework within which I will operate to talk about this topic here today. And my really fundamental concern has been that our styles of thinking are rarely matching the complexity that we find ourselves in. And particularly for those of us like myself in something like a very scientifically based activity such as engineering, I'm really good at compartmentalizing. I'm really good at trying to assume diversity out of the way I look at things and structure things, because dealing with complexity sometimes makes it easier to presume that it doesn't exist. And that certainly is something, I think, for women in concrete, that you will find that is part of your existence every day. Another area that I use very strongly as one of my intellectual guides is an Explorer's Guide to Ignorance, which was set up to support the education of medical students, but I used it extensively when I was an academic, particularly at the University of Technology, to try and talk to the students about the idea of having metacognition, the idea that when we were asking questions, we understood what perspective we were bringing, that sense that nothing is value-free, because it's only by understanding that we can think about and work through what are the barriers for change that operate within our context. So there are known unknowns, unknown unknowns, errors, unknown knowns. But the big ones that the engineering students found very difficult to deal with was taboo subjects, dangerous, polluting, and forbidden knowledge, or denial, things that were too painful to know, so you don't. These areas, particularly in something like engineering, are very challenging and very scary to consider. So diversity. So if we look at each of us as human individuals, and I decided that this was probably the closest I would get to a picture of the diversity that we all represent, that we have a surround, a very fragile surround of an inner self that really nobody can understand totally. And the reason I want to bring this up at this point is because when we talk about diversity, when we talk about women in anything, it is important that we understand that each one of those people is an individual and diverse within themselves. We all have traditional roles and expectation shifts that we are dealing with. Each one of us has family values that vary. Our work alters, our public emerges into the domestic. There are so many factors in each of our lives and our personal journeys for change that we are a diversity, complexity within ourselves. We constantly are struggling to work out what persona we are trying to data map point ourselves against within, particularly something like an area where women are not highly represented. Are we going to be that strong individual? Is it okay to be the girly girl? Or are we going to be the powerful leader? So what persona is expected and what persona would we be comfortable with having? I certainly had to go through that when I first went out on site. Nobody had been on site in the organisation that I was in. And so even the complexity of trying to work out what I should wear as an engineer on site became quite a significant conversation I had to have with myself. Then there is organisational diversity. And we often think about organisational diversity in terms of large organisations, small organisations, whether they're government-owned, etc. But there is other ways to think about organisations. And one of the powerful tools that I found in the past that was very useful when talking about this, as in my role in Women in Engineering and also as an academic, was to think about them also as explicit images or metaphors that can lead us to see, understand, and manage organisations in distinctive yet partial ways. And the reason I have the elephant there is because that is the story of the blind men, and they were men in the story, who are feeling an elephant and trying to work out what this entity is. And depending on which part of the elephant they were touching, depended on what they saw that elephant as being. So organisations for many people can be imagined as machines, as a brain, as an organism, as a culture. For some, it's a psychic prison, systems of politics, transformation, and tools for domination. And again, if thinking about how women are being positioned or any other group of people or individuals who are not at whatever the datum point is for an organisation, how they are considered or how they are treated really will determine how they feel they fit within that organisation and which part of that organisation they most identify with in terms of it being a metaphor for their experience. So we've already got a fair amount of complexity within the diversity that we are talking about. We have the individual, that individual operates within a team of individuals. We have the organisation that really reflects the experience of those individuals in different ways. That operates within a sector and the community, and we can take that then internationally. So sometimes when we pull out the complexity of the diversity or the diverse diversity within which we operate, we reduce our capacity to find out what the real drivers or triggers are for transformation, because we have assumed out much of the complexity that we need to be dealing with and thinking about as we move forward with change. So what is the value of diversity? There is enormous amount of sociological, anthropological, and ecosystem studies that suggest that diversity drives innovation and capacity to meet complexity, disruption, and change. That whenever a system is captured by one culture, by one worldview, or by one intellectual tradition, and iterates to one metric standard of success, its capacity for intellectual flexibility and agility is significantly reduced. And this was an aspect that I took when I was chairing the Council of Engineering Deans in Australia. And there was constant push to say, what is the best university for Australia? And the answer is there's no one best. There needs to be a system of universities with different ways of doing things that will suit different diverse needs within our community. And that way, we are not captured by one worldview that will iterate us away from innovation. So all of these things can sound as though they are just words on a page. And the important thing, if we are working in an area where we are thinking about transformation for us as women, for other ideas within a system, it is important that we understand wherever we are, we can take these questions with us. So the impact of diversity is very much about whether we'll meet the goals, whether social disruption will be something we can deal with, or technology disruption, what cultural expectations we will need to deal with that we didn't have to deal with. And I think we are seeing with the whole fake news agenda how disruptive it can be if we do not have the tools to deal with the idea of different understandings and different ways of thinking about the world. It does, in a diverse situation, mean that error and unknowns are less likely to be part of the landscape. So organisational approaches to diversity, and certainly my experience over many, many years, and here's where my diversity as someone who's been around for many years in this space, is how often the deficit model is used to conceptualize what diversity is. That again, whatever implicit datum point is being used suggests that whenever you have someone like a woman, like someone from another culture in a place, they are a deficit that needs to be moved to whatever this implicit norm is. More frequently, it's a long time coming and has a long way to go, there is a move towards transformative culture. And I think this is the area where there is much work happening. I've seen enormous change in this space, but I'd have to say that it's probably more fledgling than mature at this point in terms of organisational approaches. We have a long way to go. Because if we still look, and I still do a lot of consulting in organisations, and what fascinates me is that when we still look about mainstream leadership, when we look at things we see in the media, and particularly at the moment, that the leadership is still predicated very much on the model of the strong leader and followers. The expectation is that that is the implicit expectation of, if we want to be leaders, that is how we should lead. And it is so strong and so implicit that it is very difficult for a woman to be seen to be sitting on the chair quite the same way as the man in that photo. To give you an idea of how strong this still is in our community, it is only a couple of days ago that I was in a meeting, and I am often the only woman in many of these meetings still, where I am operating across organisations, and they were having a joke about how often a man can win an argument against his wife. And I was so fascinated by the fact that this was one of the slides that we were using in Women in Engineering 30 years ago about the way men talk about women and their relationships when there aren't other women there. Or even, I think nowadays it tends to be when there aren't other women there, and I just happen to be seen to be one of the boys in this situation, which is why I was allowed into the conversation. Which brings me to that other point of how much do you challenge and how much do you accept to win another day, which is always something all of us are having to deal with every day. So women are embedded within this larger sociological dimensions of organisational systems. We are constantly engaged in negotiating a complex web of experiences within the workplace that define who we are not as workers, leaders, whatever role it is that we have in the situation. And that can be quite an emotional and intellectual load that we have to deal with in addition to the many other roles that we are expected to make. For example, we are meant to be the saviour of the world, but I'd have to say the only person I would seriously consider as a sociopath I've ever worked with was a woman. So I don't think she'll be saving the world in a hurry. But we do implicitly have all these expectations, even of other women, that can work against us in the situation. So while we are transforming culture, albeit not easily, we need to do so by meeting our greatest challenge, ourselves, and our own expectations, our own unconscious expectations. So if I put, say, this slide in front of you, I am assuming most people here, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, would assume that they're not talking about nuclear fission. We make assumptions about what women do and don't do. And I do it all the time. When I was at work the other day and the young women were talking about their Botox, I made assumptions. But I'm hoping I'm learning that I make assumptions and that I am now starting to see through the rules, because I can see the rules that are impacting on how I immediately respond to things that I can't quite understand, or I have not had experience with, or I assume are the drivers for particularly other women in situations. And what that is saying is that until you understand that your own culture dictates how you translate everything you see and hear, you will never be able to see or hear things in any other way. And that is one of the greatest challenges to the way in which we may be able to deal with diversity in the workplace. That is another materials data sheet that was very prominent around the 80s and 90s. And again, I have seen it recently in situations. So let's not kid ourselves that it's not still there. It's just far more hidden than it used to be in terms of the expectations of where we may or may not be situated or being judged in situations. And we've only got to look at the news to understand that that is still quite a significant impact on women in the workplace. So just as a final wrap up on my speech here, I wanted to give a little case study on the work I'm doing in the International Engineering Alliance, which I don't think is high on everybody's radar. But this international alliance is a not-for-profit organisation which comprises members from 42 jurisdictions within 31 countries across international agreements to give mutual recognition of substantial equivalence of engineering educational qualifications and professional competence, and facilitate quality and engineering mobility. And they are the countries that are part of this alliance. I chair the governing group of this alliance. The members are all organisations. For example, Engineers Australia is the member for Australia. And I won't go through any of the others, but it is diversity writ large in that sense. The biggest challenge that this entity and the people within it have determined is something that should drive us, and we have modified, or we have done a review of the graduate attributes and competency standards for engineering, is how are we going to address the Sustainable Development Goals, noting that as an engineer, and I appreciate that this can be said for any other grouping of people who like lawyers and doctors and logistics project managers, that they are all vital contributors to making progress. The engineers just happen to have got themselves very well organised. That is one of our strengths, getting organised around these things. So what we are asking in the IEA is, how are we going to empower engineering education, accreditation, and chartered licensure to contribute to transformation of the profession? The first thing we have to do is accept that we engineered the present. And although we're very, very good at telling everyone how wonderful we are, we also need to recognise that the poverty, inequality, climate and environmental degradation borne heavily and equitably across our communities is as much an outcome of our activities over the last 200 years as prosperity, peace and justice for some. So the way in which we have structured ourselves without diversity, because it only came from a fairly limited colonialist view of the world, has had an impact. The recognition now in the IEA is that we have representatives from both sides of that colonialist equation, and that makes us very powerful in terms of how we can draw on our diversity to look at these issues. So we recognise that if we are living in a fragile planet, an interdependent world with an aspiration to leave no one behind, then we, as a diverse group of people from very different backgrounds, can think, because we can all think about how we might change that to a resource stewardship, empowered engineering, and progress and sustainability. And the reality is that this is extremely hard work. And as someone who's been in this forum now for 10 years, a bit longer, it requires continuous maintenance and nurturing and close interaction. And as I go through this, just think about what this might mean in your workplace. It can be easy to slip into actions derived from unintended, subtle claims about our way, superiority, to misunderstand across our language nuances in our haste to make things happen. My biggest weakness is I love shortcuts and pro formas without thinking about what uncertainty and energy of continuous relationship building and close interaction is lost by the use of those. And finally, the biggest thing that it is important to do is to create space for all the voices to be heard and valued. So diversity in the workplace, particularly for women, because we do come further away from this explicit datum than many others, is a difficult, complex journey that will challenge us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was incredible. And I have plenty of questions and I will ask at the end of the session. And for anyone else that is participating and would like to ask Elizabeth some questions, just a reminder to put them in the Q&A box and we can ask her. I would now like to introduce our second speaker, Chris Kouris, who is the Business Unit Manager at Reed Construction Systems. Chris currently leads the Reed Construction Systems business, part of the global ITW company, and has been with ITW for 10 years. With a bachelor's degree and master's in business and marketing, she's worked through a number of diverse careers within construction, including marketing, sourcing and sales. Chris recognized the need to help promote and develop women within our industry. As a chapter co-chair of the ITW Women's Network, Chris has been able to build initiatives to help attract, develop, and retain female talent, increasing gender diversity within ITW and Reed Construction Systems. Chris will present her session on the road to attracting, developing, and retaining female talent. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Estelle, and thank you to Elizabeth for a fantastic presentation. Can certainly resonate to a lot of that content. Thank you to everyone for joining us and also for giving me this opportunity to talk about what is such an important topic. I am hoping that my presentation will provide some insights and generate discussion on what we can do and what you can do to influence gender diversity in your organisation. We'll talk through some industry statistics and gender-based stereotypes, and then I'd like to take you through what ITW's journey has been, and what we've done to improve gender diversity in the workplace. And to Elizabeth's point, it certainly is a journey, and a long one at that. Not to be too repetitive, I did want to touch on gender diversity, but also gender equality. We know that gender diversity is the number of females in an organisation versus the number of males. If this number is balanced, then you have gender diversity. Now, organisations can introduce KPIs to achieve gender diversity. However, the challenge is to sustain it. And this is where we need to look at gender equality, which is about equal opportunity without discrimination. Let's think about the people in your organisation who do the hiring. Do they provide equal opportunity when considering employees for hire, for a promotion, or for a pay rise? Do they have a preference, an unconscious bias towards certain people in their team? Do they have gender perceptions on reliability and skill? If this is the case, then we don't have gender equality. Now, what happens over time if we don't have gender equality? When female talent cannot progress in an organisation, or they don't get equal pay or opportunity, then we lose that talent. Therefore, in my view, it's highly critical that you have gender equality, because without it, I don't believe you can have gender diversity. Now, gender equality is not only the right thing to do, it is also a very smart business decision. And gender balanced companies are more likely to have better employee satisfaction, higher productivity, increased innovation, and improved financial performance. Let's take a look at some construction industry gender statistics. In Australia, women make up about 15% of the construction workforce. That is only about a sixth of that total population. The gender pay gap in construction remains the largest of all Australian industries, and women earn about 70 cents for every dollar earned by men. There are a number of stereotypes that come to play here. Construction has long been seen as best suited for men, predominantly due to the physical nature of most roles. Now, this has led to a common misconception that women are better suited to office roles. Many females would think they are not welcome to apply for a role in construction because there can be an absence of marketing of roles or certain roles to women. Society has traditionally associated construction and engineering jobs with men. Do you ever recall seeing a home builder or a construction ad depicting a female worker? However, if you can recall seeing an ad on nursing or caring, it will likely include female representation. These are the cultural stereotypes that prevent women from pursuing careers in construction. And in turn, it reduces diversity within our industry. Women are also underrepresented in higher paying trades and leadership roles. Women are often not promoted because managers underestimate their leadership potential. Structural barriers is one of the reasons that can prevent women from being promoted to leadership or supervision roles. One example of a structural barrier, particularly in our industry, is when we have golf days. And our industry does that a lot. And there's probably a greater number of males that attend those golf days than females. Now, what would make more females attend these industry events is maybe if we had a golf day with the opportunity to learn to play golf. I know myself, I certainly avoid a lot of these events because of a fear of underperforming. I'm not great at golf, nor am I really interested in it, but also a fear of letting the team down. So if we're going to increase diversity in our industry, we need to think of ways to introduce equality and inclusion as well. Another point here is 75% of women in construction have experienced adversity in their career, and this includes a discrimination experience like harassment, and it's the reason a lot of women leave our industry. This can include something as simple as being regulated to take notes in a meeting, a role that is stereotypically assigned based on gender. Now, this type of workplace culture can be exclusionary and demoralising, affecting a woman's work experience, their career progression, and also their sense of self-worth. Another point here is 43% of women feel they do not have the same opportunities as men. Now, this disparity creates an environment where women can feel their voices are less heard and their contributions less valued. Again, leading to a workplace they may not feel inclusive and supportive. All of the above impacts psychological safety and hence diversity within the construction industry. There is a need for our industry to create workplaces where every employee, regardless of gender, feels acknowledged, secure and valued, and can turn up to work each day as their authentic self. A lot of females think, well, why does this happen? What is driving these statistics? And unfortunately, we still have these gender stereotypes in most organisations. Negative biases occur when someone thinks simply because an employee is female that they are incapable of high pressure leadership tasks. If you hold these negative biases, you are consistently judging a female as being less talented and then hence less likely to be promoted. This can also be the case as a result of cultural norms. When we hear words such as business, boss, CEO, some people immediately associate these roles with men. When we hear words such as family, household, and caring, some immediately associate these words with women. Secondly, benevolent biases is when gender bias in the workplace is hidden by kindness. This can take on a paternalistic view of women as weak and in need of support and protection of a man. Some men feel they need to shield women in the workplace from the tough business decisions because they see females as being sensitive and gentle and not competitive. Now, this is a problem because in order for us to progress in our careers, we need to be exposed to new, difficult and challenging work experiences. This experience also helps us develop key qualities such as resilience, confidence, and focus. And these qualities protect us from high-risk experiences, but also prepare us for supervisor or leadership roles. Benevolent gender bias in the workplace is also present when a woman receives consistent praise. However, this is not matched by the work given or career rewards. If you have a manager that does not spend the time to give you relevant critical feedback for your work, or encourages you to not take on extra tasks or get involved in complex initiatives, this can be an example of benevolent sexism. Some praises you may receive from someone exhibiting benevolent gender bias include, "You are so nice. It's so refreshing to see a woman in this job." Or, "It must have been hard getting to where you are as a woman." Now let's look at agentic biases. Suppose you work for someone who holds traditional gender stereotype views of women. Women should be warm and pleasant. How would they react if you behave in a strongly agentic way? For example, if you argue that your organisation should go down a certain strategic path, or if you advocate for yourself as to why you should receive a raise or a promotion, this agentic behaviour may be viewed as forceful and self-promoting. You're likely to make your traditional leaders uncomfortable, and their biases will cause them to think you are abrasive and disagreeable. And something Elizabeth mentioned in her presentation is sometimes we need to have a think about it, how we turn up and who we turn up as, and this is a really good example of that. This is also known as the Goldilocks dilemma, if anybody has heard of that. If you conform to these gender stereotypes, you are seen as pleasant and likable, but not competent. If you behave like a man, behaving agentically, you may be seen as competent but cold, unpleasant, and unlikable. It's certainly very hard for women to get it right. You're either too soft or too tough in certain situations, but never just right if there's no equality in an organisation. Now, some examples I've found of agentic behaviour include the following, and maybe have a think about whether you have ever come across these or not. She's pushy, he's persistent. She's bossy, he's a leader. She's a self-promoter, he knows his self-worth. She's abrasive, he's incisive. She's selfish, he's too busy to pitch in. She's aggressive and hostile, but he's a go-getter. She's rude, he's direct and to the point. Self-limiting biases. This is where we as women can also sabotage our own career success. And we often think of biases as something we think about others based on gender, race, education, etc. However, we as women can also have stereotypes about our own capabilities and opportunities simply because we are women. These negative stereotypes are called self-limiting beliefs, where you assume you are not good at something, or a particular role is not the right pursuit for you, or you are uncomfortable with doing something. This can cause you to become anxious and uncertain because you assume you are not as good as a man in completing these tasks. It is a well-known fact that men will apply for a job when they feel they meet 60% of their criteria. Women, however, do not apply to jobs unless they feel they meet 100% of the criteria. And this is due to a fear of failure, a fear that does not seem to affect men's behaviour. Now, what's behind these self-limiting beliefs is stereotype threat. You may be the only female invited to a meeting, for example. Therefore, you form the stereotype that this activity is only for men. If you believe women can only be good at some things and not others, you will limit yourself on the opportunities you can pursue. Lastly, motherhood biases, unfortunately, can still be prominent in our industry, and these biases are rooted in traditional assumptions that mothers should be committed to their children, that a child's development and achievement depends on their mothers being available to them 24 hours a day. Personally, I once had an interviewer ask me if I had young children and if I had made arrangements for them. Yes, he was a man, and thank goodness times are changing. Benevolent behaviour can also come into play for working mothers. Make sure you leave on time. Get home to your family. It's okay, I understand you don't need to participate in that meeting. Some women also get the reputation of being a bad mother due to agentic biases if they are not demonstrating strong commitment to their career. I'm sure everyone has heard of or felt mum guilt. Am I neglecting my children because I am pursuing a fulfilling career? Let me tell you, no study has ever found that a mother's career has had an adverse effect on her children's well-being. In fact, there has been research by Kathleen McKinn, a professor at Harvard Business School, that found women who had working mothers were more likely to have jobs themselves and earn a higher income. McKinn's research found that by being a working mother, you're actually helping your children. So let that reassure all working mothers out there who have mum guilt. One of the key drivers to shifting these gender stereotypes is to change workplace culture. This is important in achieving gender diversity, and organisations are continually looking for ways to drive this change. Let's take a look at why gender diversity is so important in an organisation. In 2015, the McKinsey study titled "Why Diversity Matters" demonstrates a strong correlation between gender diversity and profitability. The study showed that with gender diversity in executive leadership, companies did 21% better earnings, 27% better in long-term value, and were 15% more likely to generate above average profitability. These results came from a number of things, including diversity of thought. Gender diversity allows different voices to be heard. This translates to outside of the box thinking and innovation. Innovation drives differentiation and higher profitability. Diversity of views is therefore a powerful driver for a business's success. Job turnover can be very disruptive to a business. The more diverse a team, the more likely an employee will stay in their position. A stable and attractive working environment also helps with succession planning because it attracts the next wave of talent. Most of this talent is from a younger generation, and these younger generations are certainly keeping a watchful eye out for organisations' ability to drive diversity initiatives and metrics. A number of research projects around the world has also found that diversity helps to create high-performing teams. Due to an increase in diversity of views, these gender diverse teams tend to make better decisions and therefore deliver better results. Gender diversity also attracts a wider audience. There is no better way to speak to a market and a customer base than through the representation and input of members that sit in that same demographic. With this insight and knowledge, the marketing message can be more precise. So in summary, gender diversity coupled with equality make organisations more successful, and hence more organisations are looking to improve gender diversity, have specific metrics attached to their business goals to make sure that equality, inclusion and diversity is achieved. So now I want to take you through ITW's journey, just very quickly, conscious of time. ITW recognised many years ago that gender diversity would be key to longer term business success. So the ITW Women's Network actually has 65 chapters globally in ITW. So I currently co-chair one of those chapters, which is ANZ. In order for ITW to achieve gender diversity, they recognised that not only did they need to attract female talent, but they needed to provide development opportunities and retain that talent as well. And that would help then with succession planning, developing females to be able to take on leadership roles in future, hence creating diversity through all layers of the organisation, not just in the lower layers of the organisation where more females are traditionally present. So a few years ago, I embarked on a journey to support a shift in business culture. As much as leadership teams were on board with driving gender diversity and have been for decades in ITW, we discovered a bottleneck at middle management level. So therefore, it was very important for us to prioritise the development of our middle managers, as they are the ones responsible for hires in their teams and they impact the creation of inclusive environments. So secondly, we recognise the need to drive awareness of IWIN as an ERG, what it stands for, the vision, the mission, the goal and objectives. We would receive feedback from males in the business that it was not relevant to them, or what's in it for me, or why isn't there a men's network? Therefore, it was very clear that there was a lack of understanding as to what this ERG has been created to accomplish. One of the other things that IWIN did globally was set a target to ensure that we engage with 70% of the female population across ANZ throughout the year in all the initiatives and activities that we drive. So just going into then how we embarked on this journey, engaging with middle managers and supporting them in developing and retaining a deep and diverse pipeline, ensuring an inclusive work environment. Secondly, it was important to engage leadership teams across our ANZ businesses to ensure that they drive the same message consistently throughout their business, and then ensure that we are targeting and running programs and initiatives that our key audience wants to hear more about, or that develops that key audience. A breakdown of our strategic initiatives on how we do this. In order to attract talent, we needed to increase the awareness of what IWIN do as an ERG, and we introduced a quarterly newsletter just to keep that message consistent throughout the year. In terms of developing our key audience, we launched an internal mentoring program and also focused on webinars based on personal experience and development as well, very similar to the webinar we're on at the moment. Then the biggest challenge to retain our female talent, we embarked on a 2-year journey to run allyship workshops for our middle managers, and these were facilitated by a behavioural expert. We also more recently introduced active ally memberships to IWIN, of which we've been quite successful in having a number of males within our IWIN committee, but also interested in being active allies for our ERG. So this is just an example of our newsletter that we send out quarterly. We highlight all the activities that we do within IWIN. We highlight key talent. One of the opportunities we give to females in our organisation is to be part of the committee, to network, to get more exposure. We also have a membership with NAWO, so we give our members access to a lot of seminars and webinars that NAWO hold. And also we've been working with HR to assist in the successful onboarding of female employees. Secondly, to develop our target audience, we're very proud to launch our mentoring program this year, and we gave mentees the opportunity to apply to this program and highlight their 3 key areas of development. We also gave the opportunity for mentors to apply to be part of this program and highlight their 3 key areas of strength, and then we matched up mentor with mentee. And what this does is it gives females within our organisation the ability to either be mentored and focus on areas of development, or either be mentors themselves and focus on coaching and mentoring others. In order to retain all of our wonderful talent, we really needed to spend quite a bit of time with our middle managers. So we enlisted the help of an inclusive behaviour expert, Simi Rayat. She has a website called Wellbeing Face, and I believe she's also about to launch or publish a book around inclusive behaviour. So these workshops were run across New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, and New Zealand for middle managers predominantly, or highly influential independent leaders. These have been quite successful and have been really key in driving that message and having in particular the male population think about how they can be better active allies in this space. So we all know what allyship is. Definition by Forbes is a lifelong process of building relationships based on trust, consistency and accountability with marginalised individuals or groups of people. To become an active ally, you really need to ask questions, educate yourself, don't assume, don't judge, acknowledge when something has happened, accept that problems are real and actionable, and then more importantly, the final act of showing up, speaking up, and contributing to that cultural change. It absolutely is a journey. And for us, over a 2-year period, has delivered some fantastic results. We certainly still have a long way to go. Employee engagement increased by 5%, employee retention increased, gender diversity increased to 33%. If I just talk about Reed Construction Systems, we achieved 50-50 ratio of females in operations, which is a really great accomplishment. We have a more stable workforce. We've seen levels of productivity and collaboration increase, a greater level of innovation, an increase in active allies, definitely more females in leadership roles, and as I mentioned, more females in operations. So lastly, as females, but also active allies, we need to continue this journey. And some of our learnings have been that middle management and focusing on the coaching of different leaders across the organisation is absolutely critical to driving diversity, gender diversity, and also engagement with business leaders. And there will always be people in the business who are unable to adapt to the change. And if you set your business culture, these people will just naturally weed out if they don't agree with your business culture. So thank you for listening and appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was hugely informative. We don't have any questions in the chat, but I have a whole list of questions. However, I think we're at time now, so I might have to take these offline. I have so many questions for both yourself and Elizabeth. John, is that the case? I assume we have to wrap up now at 3 o'clock.
Yeah, sure. Look, we'll take it from there. I'll just take that back again. Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, I'd ask you to join us in thanking our 3 very wonderful and informative speakers, Estelle Clapham, Elizabeth Taylor, and Chris Kouris.